Thank you to Ramon, and I guess to Devin I should say buongiorno, or maybe buon pomeriggio. It's really great to be here. It's good to see you. World changers shaped here. What a bracing vision. And I've been thinking about that slogan, that motto, since the first time I saw it on the billboard over by Central Expressway. I love that vision because it prompts two questions. How do we see the world that we're seeking to change? What ideas do we use? What concepts, what terms, what categories do we use to think about the world that we want to change? And secondly, what kind of people do we need to be the change we'd like to see? What kind of people do we need to be to change the world that we see? So, what kind of categories? First question, how do we see the world that we would like to change? Well, Time magazine has provided a very nice interactive graphic online called The 200 Moments That Changed the World. These are the categories that they use: politics and society, economics and industry, science and technology, culture, and sports, of course. So we see the world through these categories. And if you go to that website, it's really interesting. You'll find a lot of the events and people and situations that you would imagine seeing there. Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species, the Emancipation Proclamation, relativity theory, first human flight by the Wright brothers, World War I, World War II, the dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first moon landing in 1969. A lot of those things we would know. There are some pop culture icons too, and I couldn't resist mentioning a couple of those. Does anyone remember when Barbie first hit the market? 1959. Okay. And one of my favorites, the Beatles and the British Invasion in 1964, or Michael Jackson's Thriller video, 1982. 13 minutes, 47 seconds long if you check on YouTube. And by the way, could I see a show of hands of the people who actually tried to learn the dance from that video? Aha, quite a few people. That's really good. So these are the categories, and we would get lots of the things we would expect to see with regard to world change. But maybe it's worth thinking about what the 200 Moments graphic doesn't show. For example, there are lots of these, but for example, take something like the growth of the Christian church in China. Now, at one time, Western observers said that the church in China was effectively eliminated, starting with the Cultural Revolution in the 1950s. And for a long time, we thought the Christian church didn't exist in China. And then in the 1980s, when China began to open up to the West again, we began to realize, there are still Christians there. According to the Chinese government today, they number approximately 24 million Christian in China. Now, that's not a huge number compared to the population, of course, but it's also not insignificant. Other observers think that there might be 100 million or more Christians in China. What does the world look like when we start to think through other categories? Or coming closer to home. In 1965, Congress passed a much more liberal immigration law, and we began to see an influx of people. In 1950, Will Herberg could write a book entitled Protestant, Catholic, Jew, A Religious Sociology of America. And with those three categories, pretty much cover the waterfront with regard to religious demographics in the United States. Obviously, that wouldn't work today. We would need to add Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Baha'is, and a number of other religious groupings, just to get a feel for what's going on in America. When I was going to graduate school, now a few years ago, our neighbors to the west were Jewish, our neighbors to the east, our next-door neighbors to the east were Chinese Buddhists, and just a few houses down the street was a Muslim family, and our kids went to school with their kids. The world has changed a lot, but we wouldn't know that by looking at the Time graphic. And of course, no piece of information can give us everything we need. But when we start to think of the world a little bit differently, in those terms, it brings us back to the second question that I'm asking today. What kind of people do we need to be to change the world that we see? This was illustrated so well a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen this 60 Minutes segment. Michael Lewis has written another blockbuster entitled Flash Boys. He chronicles the story of a group of Wall Street traders who began to realize that something was wrong in the very high volume, very rapid trading system that's now all computerized, it's digitized. Maybe some of you saw this segment. And they began to realize that some really high volume firms had invested in the highest speed fiber optic cable. And because they were using that cable, they were actually getting a little bit of a jump on their competitors. And so they could digitally see what their competitors were doing with regard to what stocks they wanted to buy. Those people would put in an order. These really high volume, really fast traders could see that, could jump ahead of them in line, purchase the same stock, and then in a matter of a few seconds sell it back to those traders at a little bit of a profit. Now, if you're talking per unit price, it's just a matter of a few cents. But if you're talking about millions and millions of shares that they sell quickly, it's a lot of money, multiplied millions of dollars. So a group of those traders decided that they were going to start their own stock exchange, the Investors Exchange. And the man interviewed in the 60 Minutes segment that stood out to me the most is Brad Katsuyama, who left a very good job with the Royal Bank of Canada in order to get involved in this business. And so the 60 Minutes interviewer was asking him about the success of the company. Why is this startup stock exchange working so well? And this is what he said. We're selling trust. We're selling transparency. What kind of people do we need to be to change the world that we see? Now, technology is, of course, very important, but we do tend to think of world change primarily through technological change and advance. But here, in the midst of very high technology business, we have an example of someone who says, let's pay attention to the people factor, to the people dimension of this situation. Jeffrey D. Sachs is a name you may recognize. He's an award-winning economist. A couple of years ago, he wrote a book entitled The Price of Civilization, Reawakening American Virtue and Prosperity. Now, he knows the technology and the technical aspects of the economy. But this book is actually a moral vision in which he uses the Buddhist concept of mindfulness to sketch a vision for how we could actually help improve economic conditions for people around the world. The concept of mindfulness, he says, mindfulness makes us aware of the suffering of others. And that awareness evokes compassion. And compassion leads to action. So the book reads a little bit like an extended sermon, a strong moral vision that grapples with real live economic problems, but from a different perspective. More recently, I saw the interview of another economist who teaches at NYU. This economist, William Easterly, is a Christian economist. And he too is worried about the effects of the way things are going on the most vulnerable and marginalized. And so he has written a book entitled The Tyranny of the Experts, Economists, Dictators, and the Forgotten Rights of the Poor. Again, paying attention to technology, he also says this. The idea that we can have a purely technical approach to resolving the problems of poverty without any moral implications is an illusion. What kind of people do we need to be in order to change the world we see? Now, you know I'm the chaplain here, so I have a vested interest in religion. But I think one of the beautiful characteristics of SMU, what gives us a singular opportunity to engage these questions, is our religious affiliation. We can combine the technical know-how of the experts and the students who are coming here to gain that expertise, we can combine that with a robust conversation about how we see the world, about what people are made of, and about what kind of people we need to be to change that world. It's an exciting vision. That's why World Changers Shaped Here is such a good slogan. Jesus said to his disciples, "To whom much is given, much is required." I actually hear that statement made around campus. We are aware, those of us who work here at SMU, we are aware that we've been given much. We know the responsibility we have. We've been given much in terms of financial resources, but we've also been given much in terms of people resources. And we can think of our faculty. They are definitely resources, but today I want us to think particularly of the students who are our resources. We are being given much. They come to us from all across the country, indeed from around the world. They come here to study so that they can go change the world. What kind of people will they be? What kind of change will they affect? That's a question we need to answer. Thank you.